And the reason we begin by closing our eyes is because as storytellers, we are the seers of the world. And so I invite you in this moment, to allow yourself to rest. You don't have to keep looking between all the different layers or trying to make sense and meaning of all the different perspectives or trying to metabolize that and communicate it in a way that might be digestible to whoever person you're trying to speak meaning-making language to at this time. I want to give you, the storytellers, a moment to rest, take a break, and maybe even do an act of imagining all the energy that you are putting out into the world and looking at the world to come back. I like to imagine it sort of like this gold dust coming back. I'm just calling it back from all the different places that I've put my attention on and allowing it to come back into this body, this being right now. And if you're someone who's really sensitive to energy, you might actually get a little energy jolt out of this. You might actually feel something. There might be some part of you in particular where all that energy that you're calling back to returns to. And there's no right or wrong way to do this. You might not have any, physical somatic experiences, and that's great too. It's just a matter of what you're putting your attention on and your intention on. And now that your attention is on your body, I invite you in this moment just to notice the position that your body is in. So notice, are you leaning forward? Are you leaning backward? Are you slumped? And I'm not asking you to change it. I'm asking you to be aware of it, to witness it, and to become very attuned to what your resting somatic body is informing you about how you're meeting the world right now. If you caught yourself leaning all the way forward, are you leaning out, giving too much, putting out a lot of energy? Or if you're leaning back, are you playing a very passive expression? Are you slumped in or leaning to the left? And again, this isn't a time for story making or right or wrong making. This is a moment of noticing. And so now I invite you to now bring your attention to your breath and bringing that all the way down to the belly, the bottom of your belly, into your pelvic floor. And it doesn't have to be that loud, powerful chish, yogic breath. It can be that quiet tai chi, using your energy efficiently. And just noticing, how much do you want to expand today? And as you found your place, slowly exhaling. And this time, as you inhale, allowing yourself to inhale with the intention to receive. Receive exactly what you came for today. And maybe you know what you came for, and maybe you caught the scent of something that you can't quite name. I'm just going to let you breathe on your own while I do this, speak this next piece at your own pace. Maybe you have stories inside of you that are banging, trying to get out, and are ready to find their way. Or perhaps the muse is outside of you and she's striking you with lightning of inspiration, and you are one of those. Micah knows what I like to call this, a creative monster. The strike of inspiration is nonstop. You're trying to figure out what to do with all those creations that keep coming to you. Perhaps you are really wanting to just make sense and bring meaning and understand that this great story that we're going through on this globe, that there might be another way to tell the story other than news and information. And there's some part of you that wants to play a part in that. And perhaps there's something I haven't named yet. And so if that's living inside you, may that emerge, perhaps even surprise you, just to be alive in the wonderment. I'm going to read you a quote, one of my favorite quotes. We think we tell stories, but often stories tell us. They tell us to love or hate, to see or be seen. And often, too often, stories saddle us and they ride us and they whip us onward and they tell us what to do, and we do it without questioning. The task of learning to be free requires learning to hear them, to question them, to pause and hear silence, to name them, and then become a storyteller. That quote is by Rebecca Solnit, and I just love that quote because it really speaks to especially the process that we're going through right now. If you can't see a story for what it is, if you can't name it, if you can't claim it, then perhaps you also might not be able to identify your own sovereignty and freedom inside or outside of it. And so we're going to play a little bit with that in greater detail today. The next quote is a quote that I love also is, "The business of stories is not enchantment, and the business of stories is not escape. The business of stories is waking up." And that quote is by Martin Shaw. And I love that quote because it also speaks to the unique journey of the storyteller. We have a romanticized sense of back in the day and the indigenous times of earth people living close to the land. The storytellers went from village to village, tribe to tribe, and they had a couple different jobs, and one of them was carrying the news and information. They were the history keepers, the record keepers. Hey, don't forget about what this tribe learned and their experience, because you can build on that. And then we go into the romanticized version of the bard, and let us not forget that the bard was kind of kept by the king, and their job was to entertain. Sure, you could speak a little truth as long as you made everybody laugh and you didn't offend anybody. And now we're coming to this time in our era, in the era of our consciousness. And the storytellers aren't just carrying the news, and they're not just here to entertain. I think more than ever, I think the storytellers and poets have always been the visionaries. I think more than ever, we have the skill and ability to recognize how to use this tool of conscious intent. And how do we as storytellers, how are we part of keeping and planting the vision of the future that we most want to live in? So we'll talk a little bit about that today. A little bit about me. I'll be kind of brief, and I'll try to keep this really brief, but just where my background comes from. I grew up on a farm in Vermont, getting to, travel and rumble around 40 acres of land. And I also grew up in Soho, New York City. My mother was a painter. And so I have this wild combination of love of wilderness and love of urban culture. And I ended up starting out very young and writing. Writing was my absolute escape, and stories were the ones, they were kind of my first friends. I moved around a lot between those two different states, and being a new kid always kind of sucks, at least it did in my world. And stories were those ones where I got the instant escape from whatever pain that was going on with that particular transition. And they got me to see and experience far more than my everyday reality. I got to get to the business of storytelling when I studied it professionally through high school, and then went to New York City to study with Sandy Meisner at the Neighborhood Playhouse and worked in summer stock and off Broadway. And I quickly discovered I was not actually all that interested in speaking other people's words, especially being stuck in the roles that were given to most women at that time. And but I got to feel in that time of being in theater that something happens in the room, that there was a magical, and I would just call it magical, that there was an energy. And I was very, very attuned to it and very curious about how do you work with that energy in a really conscious way? Like we do something together, we make something together, and then what do you do with it? And so that got me really interested in how do you work with theater as a tool for social change. I ended up getting a master's in social work, learning systems thinking, social justice, came back to combine that with theater. And actually, in Greg's town he's living in, produced an event called Engage, where we did a half live performance, half film, where we were talking to people all around that city, which is mostly fairly conservative, but also liberal, and hearing all different perspectives on people, what people cared about. And how do we change the story of politics, and how do we change the story about who's engaged and who isn't? And that actually ended up leading me to work with Al Gore at his television network at Current Television, and where I got to be right there in the prime time spot of how do we talk about climate change. So I could talk to you a lot about more, but what I'll say is that getting to work in the tech industry and in the climate change movement at that time, I got to see that all the data was showing us that people didn't need more information, that what people were actually most drawn to was story. And something about receiving that gave me permission to go back to my own heart's truth and to where my genius lived. And so I went back, and it's a big journey that I won't tell you, but it brought me into the work of what is it to be in relationship with the sacred and divine. And it kind of took me right back to my roots of being in relationship with the land. So a lengthy introduction, but here we go. So let's go back to the ancient old wisdom about language and story. So the Hawaiians believe that words are so powerful that they can raise enough energy to slow the world or set it into motion. And I really loved to invite you to really wonder about that. We say that different cities actually walk at different paces. You know, right now, I think that there's such a big commotion of so many people speaking at once. I keep looking at my clock. I feel like time's moving faster than ever. And I can't help but wonder if the real invitation was for us to slow down in our own relationship with how we use language and time itself. The Hawaiians bring us that piece of guidance. Sicilians believe that words can poke holes in the universe. Think about the last time you got very passionate and spoke something perhaps that couldn't be taken back. The Australians say that the stories of the past need to be sung to the present so that the future can exist. And all the ancient religions agree that the world was sung, spoken, and chanted into existence. I want to say that again because it feels very, even more meaningful to the moment that we're in. That all the ancient religions agree that the world was sung, spoken, and chanted into existence. Not written, but with the spoken word. And abracadabra, one of the most ancient words from the Aromatic mysticism, what does it say? For me, it means I create as I speak. So I invite you in this way, especially when there's so much going on in the world, and there's so much information. How do you speak about what is happening? How do you speak the distinction between your fear or casting a spell? I want to make this distinction. Stephen Jenkinson brings this knowledge, and I want to honor him for this. You know, sometimes we say this is going to happen. This amount of deaths will happen. Climate change will have this impact. The oceans will empty in 2015. That's spell casting. If you understand how powerful your language is, if I give you an image of a future where there's nothing to look forward to, I have created, you know, what role will you play? You know, so let's come in. I'm getting a little ahead of myself. So let's go back, and this is an authentic question. So I love seeing, oh, you hear the birds. I know. Beaming in from Topanga, California, and the birds are back. It's so great. What is a story? And this is something that I invite you all to be with me in this great inquiry. What is a story? And so I invite you to answer. I can now see all of you, so you can place your hand up, or you can place it in the chat. And you might have an idea of what a story, or a great opinion, or a description, or you might want to play the game of eloquence. You know, and eloquence is, you don't have to know the exact right answer. You are, you know, in eloquence, you don't have to be clever. You know, this is a different expression. This is rooted to the earth, open to your creative channel. Your creative channel might be speaking to the muse, might be speaking to the ancestors. You might be listening to the earth, speaking out loud. You know, Martin Shaw brings us that idea. So whatever your language is, you know, in terms of that, I call it the creative life force to come through. You know, and so when you speak with eloquence, sometimes it's just a grand experiment. You take a nice deep breath. You're willing to go slow. I believe story is, and you just see what comes out. And, you know, about 3 lines. We don't go on and on, but we sit here and we wonder together. What do we know about what story is? Okay, who would like to take a gander in their knowing or eloquent expression. Robin is saying, story is a mystery knocking on your door. Ah, the mystic among us. Tamara is saying, it's anything that you tell, tell yourself, witness, or hear. I think that's really interesting. You know, I learned the hard way that careful about what stories you tell about yourself, because other people will believe you. You know, and I witnessed both the shadow and the light of this. You know, when I worked at Current TV, there was this guy there, and he really believed himself. He believed in everything he did, and everybody believed him too. You know, and he, you know, launched more programs that failed, got more people fired. It was just like an amazing, you know, like if you looked at the paper, you know, it really wasn't working, but he really believed in himself, and everyone else did too. You know, I know that for many years I would speak my insecurities, you know, and other people would believe them. You know, so be careful of what we say, what we tell about the stories to ourselves, about ourselves, and about ourselves to others, because we are world building as we do that. Brenda is saying, okay, someone from iPad 2 is saying, symbols, images, messages from our subconscious mind. Okay, so now you're talking about, okay, so now you're bringing in the language of and the presence of that. Stories aren't literal. There's this wild collaboration, right? And we're hearing the words of symbols, images, messages from the subconscious. And that stories are metaphorical. It's one of the things is that, you know, the first language that humans spoke was in symbol. You know, they say that metaphors are the language of spirit. So many of our old stories, they are metaphors. And what happens in a metaphor is something that's magical, because it means that it's like it's a code you can only see if you can speak it. So I you know, recently went to a movie the other day, a couple months ago, and me and my friend saw two different movies. I was in the complete metaphoric expression of it, and I saw all these different things. She was in the complete literal expression of it. And we walked away seeing two different stories. And so when we talk about that, you know, the stories are very potent, because you can also hear the same story over and over and over again, and it will speak to you in a different way, even if it's said in the same words, based on where you are in your own consciousness. Kind of like Mark Twain says, you know, when I was 14, my father was such an idiot, and when I was 21, I was amazed by how wise he was. I don't think he used the word idiot though, but you know. You guys are so big on the chat. I'm very impressed. I'm also happy to hear your voices. It's an opportunity to connect with a message using the element of time, says Greg. So using the element of time, I'm so curious about that. I'd love to know more about what you mean. But yes, you know, I think that.
Well, I meant more, you know, a story typically has a start, middle, and end.
Oh, right.
So if you
Right.
message out, use that, I guess, element of time. I don't know a better way to say it.
No, I got it. So, you know, you're talking about a couple of different things. So, there's an intention. So if you know, there's a lot of different ways to work with story. And sometimes we have an intention. We want to actually, you know, make a point. You know, we hear a lot about this in the business space. I want to work with a story. I want to develop connections, and I've got my agenda. You know, that's a certain kind of story. There's also, you know, there's another kind of piece about what happens in the story, which Greg is also mentioning. Right, there's a journey. You know, there's a beginning, middle, and end. It's inherent. And what I'll say is that sometimes you can go and you can look up on Google the 6 bullet points of how to write a story, and it's going to like tell you about a climax and do all these things. But what I really love to say in the space of what is it to know a story from you know, looking at it from the landscape as a sacred storyteller, go back to the original stories, go back to the creation myths, and read a bunch of them, and speak them out loud, or any of the old stories. And you will inherently know what it is to understand a living story, a story that has survived times, okay? And when you come into that kind of relationship, you can't help but know what a story is. You don't need the 6 bullet points. You will inherently understand. It's like the rhythm will live inside of you, and you will understand how to do the beginning, middle, and end, and the story will guide you through that process too. So a very different process of doing story, but I just wanted to mention it.
I have a question. I mean,
Yeah.
I have a thought.
Yeah.
I make up stories in a language. I make up languages. And
Yeah.
I even several years ago started writing them in language. And I used to do that with the kids, and they would always be happily speaking in language back to me. But it feels like completely normal and good thing to do. And I'll do pages of invented language, and I'll look at them, and it's a story. It's an experience. Yeah, but it doesn't have a beginning or middle or end. That's not, I don't know, it's not so tangible, but it's, I think.
But is it a journey? Is that what you're speaking to? There's a journey in it?
No. Sometimes I'll find people to speak language with me. It's like I make it up.
Yeah.
And yeah, I just thought, does anybody else do that?
Well, first of all, I just love where you live. Whatever room you're in looks like it's a very fun, creative place, and would be inspiring to create from. What I'm hearing this is that you have a relationship with the muse of that kind of stream of consciousness creation, and that you allow something to come through you without having to define or know exactly what it means. Does that sound?
Yes.
Okay. So that's great. That's a really unique relationship. And that's one of the things that I personally love to encourage as much as possible, because it does allow you to enter into a different kind of way of creation. And we're going to come back to that in just a little bit. So you guys are great. Do you know that sometimes I come on these calls and nobody says anything? I'm just trying to keep up with all your commentary. Pamela, you want to speak too. Pamela.
That was me. I'm Pamela.
Okay, great. Okay.
We speak language now?
Wendy is saying it's weaving our current perspectives, ancient whispers, imagination, which solidifies our current place, or sparks our forward movement, or repeats our history, or some combination. So, gosh, again, you guys are going straight into this language of sacred storytelling. Wendy, I'm going to pick up what you just said in just a moment, because there's so much in that. Sorcha's art of is saying a flow of dreams, sometimes a scream of visionary dream. Okay. So I'm not going to read all of these because you guys were amazing. There's so much in here, and you guys are definitely right in the realm of sacred storytelling. Before I continue, here's how I speak about storytelling in a very unpoetic way. And so I really appreciate all the poetry that you're bringing. So if we understand that humans have always referred to their bodies in reference to the latest technology. So, we used to refer to our bodies as machines. Now we're in the time of technology. So we refer to, I'm going to use that language and follow that path and say, okay, a story is an operating system. And an operating system is something where we learn our belief systems, our values, and what we believe is possible. So we start hearing stories about the world based on our family perspective right at the very beginning. Then we go to school and we hear other people's versions of reality and all their different stories about what is right, what is wrong. I just caught this the other day. I've been teaching this class for, I think, 3 years now. And I just heard television programming for the first time. And I was like, how could I have been calling stories an operating system and not heard the programming reference, that we're all getting programmed through these stories that we're watching on TV. What is normal? What is acceptable? All these things. So I invite you into this moment now. If you think of storytelling, that, again, unpoetic expression as an operating system, what story are you living in right now about what's happening in the world? The story you're living in right now about what's happening in the world. And I invite you just to come up with the title of it. I'd love to hear as many of these as possible. Are you in the story of the world, the sky is falling, and are you in the story of radical conspiracy theories? Are you in the story of incredible possibility and the new dawn is among us? And I invite you to be honest, and you can live in many stories at once. So here again, I'm so welcoming your voices, but I'm also going to start reading out what people are saying. So Corinne's saying, oh gosh, you guys are going faster than I can keep up. Remembering, empowering, and connection. So Christina's saying that there's an emergence and a new dawn. Tamara's saying that that we're reawakening from a hibernation, title of her story. Greg is saying the survival guilt of feeling happy, I can help. That's a really interesting one. I really want to honor that story. It's like how that piece of what happens when our reality is separate than the reality that we're seeing on the news, and how do you manage the discord, and which story do you choose to be in based on the information versus the semantic expression. I just really appreciate you speaking to that, Greg. I wish I know that I'm saying your name correctly. I'm going to say Kate Lina is saying to find a way through, around, or over. Right. So you're talking about I hear you saying that you're in the story of creative innovation, that there's no barrier that cannot be maneuvered around. Pamela's saying I'm in the story of possibility and change. Robin's saying I'm in the story of just deconstruction, moving into reconstruction. In the story of possibility and change, evolutionary adventure. Come on, you guys. We've got a lot of positive people speaking. I am waking up from the story into truth, says Micah Sunshine. And I am receiving and living a new story about the possible world that is already here. I'm going to read that again because there was so much in that. Micah says, I'm waking up from story into truth. Truth is a complex word. It means so many different things to different people. And I'm receiving and living a new story about the possible world that is already here. Wendy Kai says, renewal of me and other creations. Oh, I love that story. Rising, a puddle jumping for cookies and feeding my family's love. He says, and the story of the end of the beginning, the dawn is breaking after the storm. Ginger's in the now is nigh. And Sorges artisting until wrecking ball demolition, next door shaming. It's like somewhere near a haiku. So yes, there's so many different stories. And when we get to claim and name what story that we're in, and again, we can be in all of them at once. There's a new possibility, and we're in the story of guilt. We're in the story I'm supposed to be doing something. I don't know what to do. The story that it's a new beginning. Now, what I invite you to do in this inquiry is, this is one of my favorite new games, and like I already got to play it, but is, what is your apocalyptic archetype in this new story? So apocalypse, if we go back to the Greek meaning, is lifting of the veils. Michael Mead has been, banging this drum for the last 10 years, informing us of what is apocalypse, and so what is that, what does that mean? But it means a lifting of the veils. So, some of you have said, okay, I can see what's actually here. So if you can look at your old operating systems, okay, the stories that you grew up with, what role are you supposed to play based in this thriving consumerism culture? Who were you supposed to be? What kind of relationships were you supposed to engage? How are you supposed to make money? How are you supposed to prove your value? When you look at, okay, what was my old operating system? Lifting of the veils, I can see it really clearly now. What archetypal energy was I playing then? Okay, the veils are lifted. Some of people might not have those same jobs or roles anymore. A lot is shaking up really fast. Why do we love chaos? Chaos is the birthplace of creation. Not only that, in a mythic sense, chaos is the mother of Earth. Just so you know, if you want to go back to your creation, all the way back to creation stories. So chaos is a very magical energy to be working in, and it is the creators, it is the, what's the word? It's the creators, where do Santa's helpers work? What's the room that they work? They have it's a tool room. It's I can't think of the word. But anyway, it's where
Santa's workshop.
Yes, thank you. Chaos is the conscious creator's workshop. It's where we do it. So what does it mean to be a conscious creator? And so again, we're coming back to this big inquiry. So if you can understand What story am I in? You know, if I'm living in the story of, oh my God, the sky is falling, death and destruction, nothing, you know, you might start to feel really paralyzed. You might go into a state of depression. You might go into a state of fear. You might go into a state of anxiety. You might start distancing yourself. You might start self-isolating. You might not know how to ask for help. You know, it can go. It's a very, very powerful story. If you're in the story of, oh my God, we've got a new beginning, there's a new world, I'm going to be a part of creating that new world. I have a role to play. I'm a creator in that new world. I'm going to start going forwards. I'm going to start collaborating. I'm going to start organizing. I'm going to blah, 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 you know, whatever that is. So what's really important to me in this moment is, and I think so many people have been so, again, on this drum, is that everyone has such unique gifts. And our society hasn't created the roles for all those unique gifts to be named. But in times of chaos, it's super exciting because new roles will appear as essential, you know, as some of the old roles are deemed unessential. So this is really your time to get so clear as a conscious creator of, what am I? What is my archetypal energy that I am playing in the story I most want to be? Maybe my metaphor for that is I'm a bridge builder, and I'm going to do that. I love playing Mystic Matchmaker. That's one of my new favorite games to play, where I get to hear what do people need? What do people have to offer? I can bring it together, you know. So think about what that is. And so I invite you to give it a good name. You know, what's your archetype in this new story that you're living in? Christine's saying the riverbank mapper. Harriet's saying a spiritual warrior. Sasha Wright is saying, I've been leaning into the sacred fool. Leading by example, says Tamara. Wise, peaceful, firm warrior, humble to admit faults and strengthened to admit and change it. That is my character. Beautiful. One of the things I heard early off when all the information came out is that make sure that your experts speaking about the virus are humble, because no one knows right now. And so that person that's claiming that role as I am here to give you information, if they're not slightly humble in the moment of chaos where nobody exactly knows everything for sure, then maybe that isn't the person you want to bank on, because you're hearing their ego as much as their creation and what their offering is. An adaptive creature is Wendy. Oh, Christine, you're a napper. Bless you. Those beings who are slowing down the earth a little bit. Our meditators are so important. Our people who are keeping peace in themselves are so critical. And Mariah is saying just the kapka. I don't know what that means. And nurturing forward. So I invite you to keep playing with that. The light bearer, the divine child, you know, I invite you to keep playing that, because when you have a language of that mythos, of that symbolic representation of who you are, it can guide you, and it can guide you also in those moments when, and we'll all go through them, when you wobble, you know, when you get the latest news report, when something happens and someone around you is in a big state of fear, you know, and it's really easy to get you know, thrown off. So it's really nice to be able to be like, this is the story I'm in, and this is the role I'm playing. And how does the adaptive creature meet someone who's in a lot of fear? What is the archetypal response to that? And it's just a way to claim yourself in a different way. Okay, so now that we talked about what a story is, usually we do that in the first 10 minutes of this class, but this is just different, you guys. This is where we are. And I'm just gonna read this: a unifier and catalyst for helping other visually understand the power of our thoughts and choices. Beautiful, Pamela. I kind of want to put another name, another title on this. Someone who's a unifier and catalyst for helping others visually understand the power of our thoughts. So she's a seer. She's like a way shower. You know, I like fancy titles, you know. So she might come in as a way shower. You want to get to one word. Okay, so if we talked about what a story is, it's an operating system. Okay. And we're playing with what ones we're choosing and what roles we're playing in there. Now, what is a sacred story? It's a sacred story. How is it distinguished? And some of you played with this language of magic. Okay, we heard a lot about that. We've heard a lot about dream time. Who else wants to take a play at what distinguishes a sacred story? Yes, Micah, we've got a ringer in the house.
Yeah, I just
I've been thinking about how sacred stories should be liberating.
Okay. Should
Yeah.
be.
And there's you know, like you were saying, there's a way to get trapped in stories, which I've been working through and with, and there's also ways stories can really liberate.
Okay. So you're speaking to, what I'm hearing you say is that stories have a job. They have the capacity to do something rather than just be something. And story is a verb, and that you're seeing that stories can have a liberating quality in them.
Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty accurate. And then just to explore how that comes about, and also the idea of stepping outside of your story into the present, into the now, is a way of waking up, which I guess is a story itself too.
Right.
So yeah, what makes this liberating, I guess.
Thank you. I love that idea. Also, we can step out of the story. You know, often I'll be here listening to the birds, enjoying Topanga, getting hyper focused on work because that's my doing. This is one of my operating systems. And then I'll go look at the news and I get pulled out of my story that everything's going to be okay. and I step into this other story. And I have to untangle myself, you know, and get clear. You gotta, you know, how do we face what is happening while managing all the different stories at once? And it's good to get pulled out of stories. And it's good to see that you're choosing what stories that you're in. So a sacred story, says Christine, is that it helps people play on earth as they live multidimensionally. Oh, I love this description. That's great. So it's like, you know, you know, I do think of stories as being very complex. And if you play in the world of that, this is one dimension and that there are other dimensions and that there's a mythic dimension, that like behind this veil, again, Michael Mead speaks to this, that behind this veil is the mythic dimension. So what if you are a multidimensional being? And here you are, you know, you go by the name of Micah, but maybe Micah in the mythic dimension shows up like a big sunflower, you know? And so how is he living in his human existence when he knows that he's got a mythic representation of being a sunflower and bringing light and joy and sprouting lots and lots of seeds? You know, what is it to know and embody that so wholly and completely? And so I really do believe that sacred storytelling, when we come into that language of the mythos, and we understand our own personal mythos, has the capacity to do that. You got me excited on that one, Christine, thank you. Lisa says, tell us something about ourselves, the sacred story. And it also remains meaningful through time and space. So now you're talking about this universality, this timelessness of stories. You know, one of the things that I think about stories is that they kind of don't play by the rules of our planet. It's very disconcerting when you think about it, because our planet has an element of entropy. It's like one of the main rules, gravity and entropy, that everything will eventually, you know, break apart and die, from your car to the tree to your house. Everything is always in a state of decomposing, except for stories, because they're not made of matter, and they can be carried. You know, I think as people, we think that can always be carried from person to person, but there's this amazing thing that happened where these different song circles meet all around the world, and a song circle in the United States, this woman sang the song of an oak, you know, and she heard this song from an oak tree, and she sang it. And there was a man in that circle, and he said, "You're singing it wrong. You got the end wrong." And he sang it. And she's like, "How can you be telling me that my oak tree song is wrong?" He's like, "Because I heard that song, and I'm so sorry, I don't remember what continent." He was on a different continent. And he'd heard that song from the Oaks too, slightly different ending, but the exact same song. So it's like these stories aren't just carried by us, but they're carried by the other elements on this planet. And if you're deep, deep listeners, then maybe you will be gifted by hearing one of those old stories carried by something that doesn't speak through the words that we were born learning. So Hamesh is saying it's a chance for a jailbreak. I love that. Jailbreaking. Yes, Pamela is saying a sacred story connects us to the divine and gives us the strength for our heroes to journey for our highest good of being. Okay, so there's so much in that, but I'm just going to briefly speak to. So I understand sacred story as, yes, a relationship to the divine. It's a different thing. So if my ego is involved, I'm going to tell you a story, perhaps with like, and I'm going to say, you know, I used to work with a lot of documentaries that wanted to have a social impact. And I would help build their social impact campaign because we were really curious about, right, the stories can lead you to action. And so those stories, a lot of times they would have a very specific intention that was designed by the person that made them to make a specific point. You know, Michael Moore is a great storyteller who has a point that he wants to make, and he does that through story that he crafts. And he's skilled and it's profound, right? But then there's a sacred story. And I'm not going to say that Michael Moore isn't a sacred storyteller. I'm just using this as an example. But there's a sacred story that is, to me, as I understand it, it's an alliance. It's a direct collaboration. And Michael Moore might actually have this. So again, I don't want to diss the guy, but I want to think about intention and egoic intention versus humble intention. You know, and egoic intention, when you meet the story, you've got a purpose, and you're gonna work with the story to do that. You know, and some people will use the word, "Oh, I'm going to use a story to do that." Pay attention to that language. Use, if you go all the way back to the etymology, means to actually enslave. So think about that. Just put that on the side, because our language will often reveal and defy us if we don't understand what it means. So now, when we come back to a sacred story, and it's a relationship where we collaborate with that creative life force that cannot be seen, and might go by the name of muse or guide or ancestors or whatever your language is for that creative life force. So as you come as a sacred storytellers, I understand it's a very humble process where you say, yes, I am a tool. Right? When we first got together today, I asked you to check in with your tool. How clear is it? How aligned is it? How conscious are you about what you're calling forth? Because again, in this language of conscious creator and opening yourself to the divine, it's like, if I know what I'm in service to, and so I ask you this right now, what are you in service to? What are you in service to? Because the more conscious you are about that, the more you're going to amplify it, the more those stories can consciously come towards you. You know, I didn't realize until I'd been writing for a long time that all I write are love stories. That's it. And for many years, they were very tragic love stories. And so, yes, I am in service to love. It's true. You know, but I'm also in service to unity. I'm also in service to a couple of other things. And so the clearer I am about that, those stories will come to me. And I really am going to continue to hone this part of being a conscious creator, because we're going to talk about what can happen if you're not one. So there's this process that happens where, you know, it's like, right, this vehicle, your tool can come into connection with the creative life force. And then all of a sudden you're telling a story. I was just talking to my housemate last night. He was writing this great big feature script, and it's kind of exciting and really amazing. And there's so much action going into it. He's having this problem, this critical problem with this one part. And I love going back, whenever you're having a critical problem, I love going back to one very simple question. What is your story in service to? Because what this comes back to is that you're acknowledging, as a sacred storyteller and as a conscious creator, that you're in a collaboration, and that story has a life force all its own. You want to be careful about being overly in service to it, right? Because it is a collaboration. You don't have to be taken over. You don't have to be possessed. You know, I was saying, the muse doesn't care about you. She really doesn't. You know, it's like the creator energy is going to come through. So, but with something like this, you know, where you want to really consider, okay, like, what is your story in service to? And so when you lose your way sometimes, that can be a way to kind of bring you back to north, you know, where you can listen for what does it need to do. And so what I understand about a sacred story versus another story. Okay, sacred's a setup. As soon as we use the language, we, you know, and what is it to me, say sacred, but to be in relationship to the divine, to say that there's a life force in it, but a life force that's serving life. To me, that's the distinction. So Micah said, you know, you should feel liberated. You know, I always be wary of using the word should personally, because that's, again, to me, my egoic form saying this story better do that. Or, you know, and who am I, you know, in my perspective, to define what the story is going to do for you? I don't know. I don't know what you need from it. So, but, you know, I don't want to discount that at all. What he's talking about is that they can do things, you know, and that one story might bring someone to the path of not understanding their relationship to love, while someone might feel liberated from a love story when they hear it. But that they're doing something, and they're doing something to support your thriving. So after a sacred story, I feel a couple of things. I feel more alive in myself. I feel nourished. sometimes my nervous system just really feels good. You know, I've been able to be held by something. And so I've trusted my storyteller that you were to take me on a journey. A sacred story can take you to the darkest places in the world. It can talk to you about the Holocaust. It can talk to you about COVID-19. It can talk to you about all kinds of things, but it's not going to leave you in a state of panic or fear or death and destruction. It's going to plant the seeds of beauty, of grace, and it's going to show you the pathway out. I feel like stories are guides. A sacred story is a guide. So, and so that to me is the distinction. So look at your television shows and what you're watching every night. You know, how do you feel when you watch them? You know, the Tiger King. I haven't watched it. I've totally, of course, gotten pulled in by all the previews, and I've heard. So I always like to go to people like, how do you feel afterwards? That's my like go-to. And I heard from too many people that they just felt kind of gross afterwards. And I was like, well, I don't need that experience right now. There's so much going on in the world. Tiger King, yes, thank you. And so it's like, when I watch a television show, or when I take in a story, especially right now, when there's so much going, I feel like there needs to be a real care and tenderness of this consciousness, you know, bank situation right here. And so I really do want to be consciously taking in sacred stories, things that are going to help enliven me, things that are going to give me the courage to live through these times, the innovative thought that are going to inspire me, you know, or inform me. So, you know, to me, it's like we got to be on the lookout for zombie stories. That's on the flip side of what a sacred story is. Zombie stories are the stories that, and it's a cautionary tale, because I don't know that people actually set out to make zombie stories. You know, again, what is your intention as a creator? That's what I'm going to keep coming back to. So one example is Jaws. Jaws was a story that was written by Peter Benchley. I don't know the story of why he wrote it or how he got inspired to write it. I actually need to find that piece out. But it was picked up by Steven Spielberg. It was the very first film he ever produced. So what was his intention? He wanted to get to be known as be a successful, you know, director. We understand that. He had a really good eye. If it leads, it bleeds. If it bleeds, it leads, right? So he had a good eye for what people would watch, be drawn to. And they also did something where it was the very first film that was shot out in the open ocean. So whether or not you consciously speak the language of symbol, it's in you. And what does ocean represent but our consciousness? And so it's the very first film that was actually ever filmed out in an ocean. And so all of a sudden we have this story, and now we have Jaws, you know, and they make this big metal shark, and it breaks, and they run out of money, and they can't make another one. And so they're innovators, right? And so they decide just to show pieces of it. And so now as you're watching, you don't get to see the big dumb metal shark that the prop dude made. You get to see a piece of it, and it goes right into the symbolic form. So shark then begins to represent fear of the unknown and our fear of death, planted right into our consciousness. And that movie was single-handedly responsible for a massive die-off of sharks all around the globe. And our consciousness and consideration, our great fear of these animals. More people die from coconuts falling every year than sharks. So when Peter Benchley realized what had happened and the impact of his story, he actually spent the rest of his life protecting the oceans and being an ocean protector and giving scholarships and money to people who were doing ocean stewardship. That's why I say it's a cautionary tale. I don't think he set out to do bad things with his story. And so as we become more and more awake to what it means to be conscious creators, and that our stories will impact people in ways that we will never know, this is the invitation of the moment. So, you know, we made it through the first 10 minutes of my normal webinar. And I want to honor your time. And you guys were so inspiring to me that I actually also got into much greater depth than I normally do. So it's like, you know, Steven Spielberg says, feed those who feed you. And so you have nourished me well with so many of your comments and so much of what you brought today. I'm going to give you, I'm trying to figure out how to end with you today. I could tell you a story, or I could give you a recipe for how to tell your own story. Can I get a hand? Who wants to hear a story? You can raise your hand. And who wants to get a recipe to raise their own hand? Recipe? Is recipe winning? Recipe's winning! Yes! Okay, so you'll get a little bit of both. So this is a recipe for a threshold story. It's a wisdom story. And so the way that you find it is, and the reason why I use recipe is, I don't know about you, but they're just guidance. It's like you open the book, it tells you to have these ingredients, you look at the ingredients in your fridge, you add a couple of inspiration, you taste it, you make it taste right, and you got something, right? So same thing with this, it's about listening. What did we just talk about? What is a sacred story? It's about listening for that inspiration. So I'm going to give you, the way around the ballpark, and give you the 4 different, the ways around, but you have a party once you're in there, and follow your inspiration, and trust that the story that's coming through with your intention to bring through a wisdom story. What does a wisdom story have? But it has your medicine in it. It has the things that you learned. It's a way shower, right? It's a way to guide someone else through the minefield that you're on the other side of. Okay. So when you choose a wisdom story, pick that moment in your life that really sucked. It was not one you necessarily want to repeat. Maybe you're grateful for it. Maybe you change, it's like that can be nice, but and maybe you're not grateful for it right now. But it was a hard moment, and you made it through, and you're on the other side. And so when I say on the other side, like I'm actually pretty literal. Like you're at least 1 to 3 years on the other side of it, at least. You've got perspective. You're not right. If you were right and someone's wrong about that story, this is not a wisdom story. You're not ready yet. So, just know that, okay? So you pick that moment that's really, really hard. And you're going in with the intention, right? And so again, what do we love about wisdom stories and being sacred storytellers? That we don't have to have all the answers. We don't even know how to articulate the wisdom yet. We're just setting a little intention, maybe making an altar to the story, and going for that. So we begin with, where does the story really begin? Where does the story really begin? So remember that spider is the archetype of the storyteller. Spider weaves a web that you can't actually really tell where the beginning and where the end is. And it's non-linear. So when I tell the story about when I went through the experience of having thyroid cancer, my story does not begin on the day that I was sitting across from the doctor who informed me. My story begins when I was 4 years old. And I had this really beautiful tapestry in my bedroom. And it was hand woven, and it was of this woman who was giving out a bouquet of flowers to a bunch of little kids. And it said, "Give what you have, Leah. To others, it may mean more than you dare to think." And I was 4 years old, and I was barely learning to read. And I just remember reading it over and over and over again, because for the life of me, I could not understand it. Give what you have, Leah. To someone else, it may mean more than you dare to think, until I was 29 years old, sitting at this desk across from this doctor who had just informed me that I had a very severe case of thyroid cancer, and they were going to cut across my larynx, and there was a good chance I might lose my voice. And that's when I understood what that meant. So again, I love that example, because your story doesn't begin, it's not about that moment, because you are a rich storied person and all of the moments are connected. And so when you ask that question, where does my story really begin? It's a humble inquiry that can come from inspiration. So you don't scrunch up your forehead and try to get literal about it. You do that kind of sense of awe, opening, take it for a walk, go for a bath, do the dishes, and allow the answer to come to you. I have to close my door because my next door neighbors are making lots of noise, and it's actually really hard for me to talk story while listening to that. So hold on. Remember, one is a storyteller. Make sure you can focus. Okay, so so if you've got that spot, right, you know what it is. Now you also want to start be thinking about like the universal themes. So, John Steinbeck says, if your story is about yourself, your story will not last. Okay, so if the story is about yourself, it will not last. But if it's about others, it can live forever. So you're giving a wisdom story because this is not a medicine story. It can be therapeutic in the process of writing it. But you have this intention where I'm not telling you, I'm not processing my experience of getting thyroid cancer at this point in the process of giving a wisdom story. There's a different arc of working with stories and trauma, and that's a different class altogether. But I'm going to tell you that there's a moment when, it's like I'm dealing with my story, and then when you make it into a wisdom story, you go like this, and then it's this cool thing, and now it's for your audience. It's kind of hard to do this from there. It's easier to go, there you go. This is a wisdom story, and that's what happens. There's this transfer. The story starts to become about your community. So my story is not about me getting thyroid cancer. It has nothing to do with thyroid cancer. That was the threshold. That was my initiation. But what my story is about was that moment when I was told that I had this amazing moment. It was as if the escape hatch just showed up in that doctor's office. Because what you don't know about me, perhaps, is that before that moment, I had mastered the role of being the victim. I could out-victim story anybody in the room. And in this moment, when I was about to get the crown of victimhood, something in me came alive and said, oh, hell no. And I jumped out the escape hatch of that story and into a new one. And I wish I could tell you how I knew to take the jump. I honestly don't. All I can say is, as I felt that old story coming after me, and I didn't want to live in it no matter what. And so I jumped into this new reality without knowing what the new role would be or what the new lines would be. I just knew that I was not going to be a victim to this experience. So again, so now I just took about this moment, right? So I made my story about an initiation. I made the story about what is it to consciously, we did a little bit before, what's your old story? What's your new story? And we'll all be giving initiations. And when you go through an initiation, there's a couple of basic rules. One of them is that you won't get to bring all of you across. Something's going to go. But when you say yes to it, you don't know what's going to go. Right? So think about what happened in your experience. So now we're doing something. We're taking this moment that totally sucked in your life, right? And we're reforming the story, and we're saying, oh, it was an initiation. Oh my gosh, okay, well now that it's an initiation, I have all different context, right? Something had to be left. What was left behind? What was gained in the process? Who did I become? What was called out of me? What gifts were called out of me? And now you're starting to see how your story is beginning to act like a mine through the minefield, like a guide through the minefield. Okay, so now you know why it's a recipe and it's a how-to guide, right? Okay, so the third part that you might want to consider is, now that you've got your universal theme, you know where your story really began. Now you might want to consider, well, who were your guides to this experience? This is classic, right? Your hero's journey. You always got some guides. Who was your Yoda? But again, it might not be as obvious as you think. So really, again, open into that state of wonder. Who really, truly guided you through this? When I came home after that surgery, something that you don't know about when you have your thyroid taken out is that the doctors don't actually know you how much medicine to give you. Everyone responds in extremely different ways. So they give you something, and they just see how you responded. So for me, they gave me speed. I got so much energy. I lost all this weight. I had all this energy. I came out of the hospital. I invited my friends over and said, hey, let's build a 70-foot circular garden. And they're like, Leah, it's a little weird to do that your first day out of the hospital. And I'm like, I've got all this energy. Let's go do something with it. And so we did. And then I fell into a deep, deep, deep depression. And that garden was my way home. And every morning I would walk the circles of that garden. And that garden taught me something that I had never known anything about. And it was gratitude. This was before Oprah and everyone talking about gratitude as being a practice. I didn't know anything about gratitude. I definitely had never practiced gratitude. But somehow that garden told me that on the way in every morning, be grateful. And so I said my gratitude prayers. And on my way out, I would pray. And I would pray for the world I most wanted to live in, for the version of me I most wanted to live as. So again, maybe you've got Yoda, maybe you've got a dog, maybe you've got a grandparent, maybe a stranger comes to you and talks to you on the street and gives you that bit of wisdom that opens up the whole world to you. Listen for who is your guide through your experience. There's going to be other parts of your story, right? There's always a beginning, a middle, and end. There's a journey, there's the and then what moment. And then there's the ending. And you can get off this call in just a little bit, and you can write this story in 10 minutes. I want you to know that. You can write an amazing wisdom story in 10 minutes. You can bullet point it out, okay? But the ending, that is a skill and craft to actually nail a great ending. So I'm going to give you a very quick and dirty way to do an ending so that you could actually, around the dinner table tonight, inspire those around you, either on Zoom or in person, to all share their wisdom stories. And so a quick and dirty way to end a story is through a story blessing. And I learned this technique from Carolyn Casey, and she learned this from John Donahue. It comes from the Kabbalah tradition. And so it's sort of like, if then sort of it works. Okay, so if you find yourself, and so you want to think of a metaphor. What do we say? Metaphor is the language of spirit, So it's like, think of what your story is about, and then think of a nice metaphor, but don't think too hard. Just allow yourself to be inspired. How is this kind of a metaphor? So, if you are, this is an example of one. If it is a dark and stormy night, and your ship has sunk, and you've lost all hope, and despair seems to be the last lifeboat that you can ride on. Then, may the light of the moon cast a path to shore that you can follow, that will bring you peace and hope and rest, knowing that a new day will dawn. So you just gave someone, thank you, Greg. So you just gave someone a blessing.
Until my meeting in like 45 minutes.
What an epic, strange, synchronous ending in a way.
Indeed.
Blessings to everybody. Thanks.